everyone, Brad here with Retro Cars Forever, and here with a big channel update because I was lucky enough to get another Corvette, this time a C5 50th anniversary. In this video, I'll show you what I bought, why I bought it, some of the funky modifications it had, what the 50th anniversary package is all about, and what I think of it compared to my old C4 and C6. That's right, I've now completed the holy trinity of retro Corvette ownership. So I'll tell you if the C5 is the Goldilocks Vette that's just right. First off, an update on my 2007 C6, which I named Elvis. Elvis is, unfortunately, dead. I can't go into details right now, but my C6 was involved in a minor accident. The important thing is, no one was hurt. In fact, it was at such a low speed that the airbags didn't even deploy. But there was just enough frame damage to unfortunately total the car. I was heartbroken, as I only had the C6 for a year, and it was by far the nicest vehicle I've ever owned. So maybe I doomed it to an early grave by naming it Elvis. I was so bummed, I didn't even want to think about owning another Corvette. So how did I end up with another one? As always, I test drove a bunch of other fun cars in the 10 to 30 grand range to figure out what would work best for me as my new daily driver and occasional canyon carver. And as always, I realized nothing beats the performance, comfort, luxury, practicality, and style of a Corvette, especially for the money. So this time around, I focused on the 5th generation of Corvette, which ran from 1997 to 2004. I vividly remember how big of a deal the C5 was when it first debuted, due to some quantum leaps in engineering over the C4. The C5's new structure was a whopping 4.5 times stiffer, which quelled squeaks and rattles, softened the ride, eliminated the C4's high door sills, and made handling much more stable and predictable. And moving the transmission to the rear made for better weight balance and more interior space. Looking up common C5 issues, such as the nearly unrepairable EBCM module in earlier cars, I focused on examples of C5s made after the 2000 model year, when most of the early bugs had been worked out. I did test drive the track-focused Z06 version, but I realized the performance was overkill for my needs, and it wasn't very comfortable for the slog of daily driving. Also, the Z06 has a fixed roof design, and I knew I'd miss the removable target top and extra trunk space of the standard hatchback coupe. So this 2003 coupe caught my eye, for sale by a local Los Angeles used car dealer. It was a one-owner car with 65,000 miles on the clock, and the asking price was right in the middle of my budget. It was loaded, and miracle of miracles, it included the most important feature to a canyon carving enthusiast like myself, the treasured 6-speed manual transmission, which is hard to find as only 1 in 4 hatchback coupes were equipped with the stick. As icing on the cake, it was a 50th anniversary special edition, which I'll go into more details later. Although this car was very clean, I was hesitant at first as the previous owner had splurged on some aftermarket aesthetic modifications that just weren't my personal taste. Mechanically, the car was completely stock, but the engine bay was festooned with all sorts of maroon and chrome engine covers. And the interior had extra maroon pieces covering the door pulls, center console, and the headrests. It even had this funky waterfall cargo partition that didn't really do anything beyond eating up cargo space and adding some additional flair. But I realized these additions told a positive story about the previous owner. This car was clearly their pride and joy. And thankfully, all these custom pieces were removable and in fact helped preserve what was underneath. I also happen to like a couple of added bits, such as these aftermarket cup holders, which are useful considering how tiny the stock cup holder is. I also dug this decorative chromed 50th exhaust plate and this Indianapolis Motor Speedway decal in honor of the Corvette pacing the Indy 500 that year. Another positive clue about the previous owner was this Corvette Museum delivery sticker on the door jamb. This was a $500 option that gave the original owner the privilege to get a special tour of the factory and the museum, take delivery of their new car, and then drive it all the way back home. Now that's pride of ownership. So after a bit of haggling, I bought the car. I removed and sold the maroon bits for a little extra money, and it's really feeling like my car now. Alright, let me take you on a quick tour and I'll show you what the 50th anniversary package is all about. So the most obvious thing to talk about with the 50th anniversary edition is the color, which is exclusive. It's called Anniversary Red. Now in the shade, it just kind of looks maroon, but get it out in the sunlight and the thing almost glows. And that's because it's got these really cool aluminum oxide flakes that are floating underneath a special red tinted clear coat to give it that extra deep look to the paint. Another unique touch for the 50th anniversary are these champagne colored wheels. And you also get these 50th anniversary side fender badges. But I think the special 50th anniversary interior coloring is where the 50th anniversary package really shines. As I mentioned in my C4 versus C5 versus 6 review, the interior quality is probably the worst part of the C5, and a big part of that is how the upper part of every other C5 interior is draped in bargain basement black. So I think the 50th anniversary edition's unique two-tone shale coloring really brightens up the interior and makes it look a lot higher quality. And these special leather door pulls and armrest pads add to that luxurious feel. Plus, you get 50th logos on the floor mats and beautifully embroidered badging on the headrests, which I cannot believe the previous owner ever wanted to cover up. I also think that the owner's manual is pretty neat. It's got the cool little logo right there. And then you open it up, you got a nice little Corvette branded pen. And then you even get a nice little 50th anniversary branded notepad to write on. That is a cool little attention to detail. You also got this cute little 50th anniversary logo on your key. Now, a note about the badges. Every single 2003 Corvette got these special 50th anniversary badges on the back and the front of the car. But that doesn't mean it's a 50th anniversary package, because every 2003 Corvette got those. While the 50th anniversary edition was mostly aesthetic, it did introduce a trick mechanical option to the Corvette lineup, the magnetic selective ride control, codename F55. These trick F55 dampers are filled with millions of tiny iron balls that can be magnetized to instantly change the firmness of the shock absorber based on whatever the computer senses that the car needs. It's most noticeable on huge dips in the road where the standard suspension might make the car wallow. On the same road, the magnetic suspension keeps everything under control. Other than that, I honestly don't notice a huge difference compared to conventional shocks, but I do appreciate the massive change between the Tour and Sport setting. Tour makes the ride as soft as a Cadillac, which is perfect for daily driving. But for canyon carving, switching to Sport firms the suspension up really nicely. The big downside of the F55 shocks is how rare and expensive they are to replace as they're discontinued. New OEM F55 shocks are around $450 to $1,000 each, if you can even find them. Not too hard to find on the front, basically impossible to find in the rear. Eventually, I'll have to pony up a few grand to replace them all, or buy a full set of conventional shocks and bypass or program the electronics out. But so far, my shocks are working fine, so these special shocks are staying put. So that's the 50th anniversary in a nutshell, and it was an extremely popular option. In fact, 1/3 of all Corvettes made in 2003 were 50th anniversary editions, so they had a lot of takers. Now, most of them were convertibles, which they sold 7,500 of, and then about 4,000 of them were the hatchback coupes like mine. So not really rare, but definitely special. All right, let's take a look under the hood, shall we? And we have the legendary all-aluminum pushrod 5.7 liter LS1 V8 that debuted in the C5. Now, this is totally stock except for these fuel rail covers are colored to match the paint. And then you got this 50th anniversary air intakes. Both of these things were added by the previous owner. I actually didn't mind how they looked, so I just kept them so I had to monkey around with trying to replace them. Otherwise, completely stock engine. That's not a bad thing. So in 2001, the LS1 got a little bit more power, and the manual option gave you a smidge more as well. So this car is putting out 350 horsepower and 375 pound-feet of torque stock, and that's a lot of juice when you think about it. It's a car that's only weighs like 3,200 pounds, which is about the same weight as the C4 or the C6. In instrumented testing at the time, the C5 could zoom from 0 to 60 miles per hour in the high 4-second range. Even so, the C5 is noticeably slower than my dearly departed stock C6, which had 400 horsepower. But again, that much power is almost overkill on public roads. The C5 still has plenty of snort for canyon carving and the occasional hooligan outburst. So now that I actually own a C5, how does it compare to the C4 and C6 that I used to own? Well, I don't want to repeat what I already covered in my C4 versus C5 versus C6 video, so check that out for more details. But I do have some new insights. Let's start by comparing the C5 to C6, as they're pretty similar. I now realize the C6 is basically a C5 with the rough edges sanded down, especially when it comes to unpleasant noises. For example, if you get a manual transmission like mine, there's some gnarly drivetrain rattles when you turn the engine off. Thankfully, you can avoid this racket by pushing in the clutch while turning off the car. And it's not worth fretting about, as all C5 manuals do this. In fact, the GM supplied owner's video goes over another funky driveline noise in C5 sticks that mine sometimes makes when driving away from a stop.
It sounds like this. This noise is not an indication of a problem. It's a characteristic noise inherent in the driveline configuration of the Corvette.
They found a way to eliminate those supposedly inherent noises with the C6, most likely with the addition of a second transmission mount, which makes the later Vette feel a lot more polished than my C5. So I'll let you in on a little secret when it comes to these driveline noises. If you're trying to score a great deal on a stick shift C5 like this, especially from like a dealer or someone who doesn't really know much about these cars, you could claim that the car needs work and use that to bargain down the purchase price. Not that I would ever do such a thing. I was also surprised that the long and low nose of the C5 scrapes even more than the C6's did. It got so bad that I installed these C5 Fang skid plates that slide over the metal lower radiator supports. They still scrape sometimes, but at least they're slicker and quieter than the raw grinding of metal. The matte pockets in the door of the C6 was another feature I never knew I would miss so much, as the C5 does not have them. So while the C6 is more refined and luxurious, there are overkill features on the C6 that I'm glad to be rid of, such as the funky electric door handles or the needlessly complex ignition toggle switch. I also don't miss the C6's center screen. Obviously I wasn't using it for navigation, but the music controls were difficult to use without turning my attention away from the road. While the C5's radio controls are pure bland corporate GM, I do love how simple they are to use by touch alone. Plus, considering I'm looking at screens pretty much the entire day anyways, it's nice to take a break from screens whenever I'm actually sitting in my car. And cut. I also prefer the shifter feel of the C5. My early C6 has a bulkier, short throw feel that's a bit ponderous. Maybe I'm in the minority on this, and let me know in the comments below, but I prefer a lighter, longer throw like what the C5 has. The C5's clutch pedal effort is noticeably lighter too, which is a godsend in stop and go LA traffic. As for how the C5 compares to the C4, it's just a totally different beast. As much as I adored my C4, I don't really miss it for everyday driving duties. I don't miss pulling my leg muscles getting in and out of tight Los Angeles parking lot spaces, or how much extra effort the target top took to deploy, or the stiffer clutch, and I definitely don't miss the rough ride. Most of what I missed with the C4 was how wonderful it was as a weekend warrior, where the C4 was a warm, fuzzy, nostalgic occasion. I also appreciated how cheap and easy it was to run and repair. I made a whole video documenting every dollar I spent on my car over my 4 years with it. If you'd like to know more, check it out here. As for the highly subjective topic of styling, look, I love the looks of all three of these retro Corvettes, but the C5's design just might be my favorite. And apparently, I'm not the only one. I've actually gotten more compliments with the C5 compared to my other two Vettes. Not only does the C5 look great, it sounds great too. To my ears, the stock exhaust system sounds way better and more aggressive than the rather mild stock exhaust sounds from either my C6 or C4. Take a listen and let me know if you agree. I believe the C5 sounds so different because the exhaust has this unusually circuitous path where the mufflers sit sideways instead of pointing straight back like in the C4 or C6. And that was to clear some space underneath the C5 for this unique central cubby in the trunk, which is a nice additional bonus. Even though I've only owned the C5 for a few months, I've already had a lot of neat experiences with this car. First of all, I made sure that all the maintenance items were up to date, as the car didn't really come with many service records. I replaced the battery and swapped out the spark plugs and wires. I also changed out pretty much every fluid in the car, including the often forgotten differential fluid. And speaking of forgetting things, I kind of forgot to pay close attention to what I was doing when I was draining the transmission fluid, so here's that little incident for your amusement. Oh, oh my goodness. Oh my god. Oh. I also installed this skip shift eliminator, so the car no longer forces shifts from first to fourth under moderate acceleration. Took just a few minutes to install, and it's the best $20 I've ever spent. So far, the C5 has been perfectly reliable, and I've taken it on several canyon drives with other car-loving friends. One morning, we even ventured high up into the snowy mountains. The traction and stability control got a good workout, but it made it just fine. So I'm quite thrilled with my C5 Corvette, and at least for my personal taste, I do see it as something of a Goldilocks retro Corvette. The C5 has most of the comfort, room, luxury, and day-to-day livability of the C6, while still retaining a lot of the retro charm and simple tactility of the C4. So for me anyways, the C5 is the best of both worlds. I'm looking forward to many more adventures with the C5, so make sure to subscribe to see more, and click here to check out all the other retro Corvette videos on my channel. Thanks for watching, and remember, if you have a cool car, get out there and drive.